if you can describe what displacement looks like currently in Gaza and the West Bank. And again, maybe I'll start with you, Joel.
Thanks. And I think the level of displacement is really just unfathomable as a percentage of the population. Before the 7th of October, the population of Gaza was somewhere around 2.3 million. And the level of destruction we've seen and the instability and the lack of safety has meant people have been on the move, displaced multiple times. We've heard stories of people who've moved 7 or 8 times, sometimes returning to homes that have been damaged and destroyed and otherwise, in normal circumstances, would be considered unlivable, but are becoming the only realistic opportunity for somewhere that's vaguely safe. And there's, not really any safe places in Gaza, I think it's fair to say at this point in time, but somewhere that at least has walls and may have a roof. Um, Gaza has sort of 5 governorates. Northern Gaza and Gaza are north of the Wadi Gaza River. And very early on, with the ground invasion, that became a place where many, many hundreds of thousands of people were displaced from, moving south into places like Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis and then Rafah. And ultimately, in the spring of this year, it's believed that over 1.5 million, maybe as many as 1.8 million people have moved south into the Rafah area, the most southern governorate of Gaza on the Egyptian border. And that was relatively untouched by the destruction that we'd seen in Gaza City, in Khan Yunis, in Deir al-Balah, until the last couple of weeks, really. And that's speaking, in late May, that we've seen the ground invasion now in Rafah, and many of those millions of people there that were displaced originally from the north or from the central areas have now moved again. And we have a case in point with our own work there, in that we have a hospital called Al Ahli, which is in Gaza City. Through the displacement of medical staff, we'd established a medical center in Rafah, which was operating just as a clinic. It had a pharmacy. It was basic healthcare. It wasn't offering the full range of medical services that's still being offered in Al Ahli Hospital, which is still functioning in Gaza City, remarkably, and it's a real testament to the work of the diocese. We'll come to it later, I'm sure. But in recent days, that work that had been happening in Rafah has been displaced itself. So our clinic has moved. It was always designed that we'd be able to be mobile with it, and that's now operating in a Khan Yunis. So, I think even at that level of provision of services, people have been displaced multiple times.
And has there been any significant displacement in the West Bank, or what's the situation there?
I think it's a more complex situation. I think it's really important that when we think about the situation in Israel and Palestine, we do think about displacement as a whole. And that also means thinking about Lebanon. So I'll just mention that briefly. About 93,000 people in southern Lebanon have been displaced by the back and forth fire between Hezbollah and the IDF. And similarly, probably about 100,000 Israelis have been displaced by fighting, not just around Gaza, but also in the northern parts of Israel. So displacement is affecting many of the communities. It's not just one community. In the West Bank, I think many of the effects we're seeing initially are economic. And I think we've seen very serious incursions into several of the Palestinian cities, particularly Jenin in the north of the West Bank, but also in Nablus, Ramallah. Last night, the main vegetable market was set on fire during an incursion by the IDF there. It hasn't, as I've seen and I've heard, led to mass displacement of populations through this level of fighting. There's been over 500 people killed in the West Bank since the 7th of October, many of those in Jenin and in Nablus, particularly in some of the refugee camps. The actual circumstances of displacement at the minute are low, but the living conditions are very poor. Economically, we're not seeing any pilgrims coming through at the moment. We're not seeing tourists coming through. And it's not just the Christian community, it's the whole community in Palestine that really relies on tourism to live well, and that's disappeared. And then for those who are often employed in the Israeli economic sector, whether in factories or in construction, have lost their work permits. Not all of them, obviously, but large numbers of them overnight since the 7th of October. So the economic situation is bad, and those with the ability to consider leaving, I think, are beginning to think about it. And we've heard anecdotally from several of those in the diocese that those with enough money to sort of look at where might be uh, a better place to live, places like Cyprus, are being considered as kind of places to escape to because the opportunities they perceive are dwindling.
Yeah, yeah. And just to remind our viewers that the IDF are the Israeli Defense Forces, the Israeli military, essentially. How then, Joel, has the Anglican Alliance responded to the crisis in Gaza and the West Bank in partnership with the Diocese of Jerusalem? And maybe just before you describe that, if you could just say a couple of sentences about what the Anglican Alliance is.
Sure. So the Anglican Alliance is the development, relief, and advocacy wing, though we're an independent body of the Anglican Communion. So we've been operating in many ways, sort of birthed out of the Lambeth Conference back in 2008, and going since then. And so we have this specific focus on development, relief, and advocacy, connecting and equipping and inspiring the Anglican Church throughout the world. So wherever the church is, we as the Anglican Alliance are accompaniers of that. We've often described ourselves as midwives of hope, in that we're there to go alongside the church. We're not birthing something ourselves. We're there to support the church as it creates situations of and we have specific focuses around people on the move, around creation care, around asset-based community development, several other issues as well. And we work through regional facilitators. So I'm the regional facilitator for the Middle East, and we have equivalent people, in the Pacific or in Southeast Asia, or Latin America or Caribbean, for example. And then with a small secretariat based in London at the Anglican Communion office there. So one of the ways we often operate as the Anglican Alliance is when there is an emergency, we kind of try and convene Anglican partners from throughout the world and sort of say, what's the need? How can we respond? And I think very much see the fact that the church has often been doing things. It often has the capacity to do things, but it can be incredibly overwhelming when an emergency happens. Churches are not NGOs. They don't have vast numbers of staff, and they often don't have the capacity just to employ more people because of both cost, trust, knowledge, experience, etc. So after the 7th of October, we started looking at as Anglican Alliance, what was the need, started speaking with the Diocese of Jerusalem about what might be helpful. And we'd not done an emergency response or an emergency appeal as the Anglican Alliance with the Diocese of Jerusalem previously. This was our first time working together in a serious fundraising way. We've done little bits and pieces. This is a major appeal. And so we've gathered, I think, about 8 organizations at this stage who would otherwise individually wanted to have supported the diocese, and PWRDF would have been one of them. And in one way, it allows us to coordinate to make sure the scope of the work that's being done is greater. But also it reduces the load on the diocesan staff that are producing the reports, doing the financial reporting side of things, the narrative reporting side of things. And instead of 8 reports to 8 different institutions, it's one report. And I think collaboration in this way is beneficial for the church locally in terms of burnout, in terms of staff care, but also in terms of what we can do, because we can allocate greater amounts of money and see a greater amount of what's coming in. So with this appeal that we've done, we're about 4.5 months into the first 6-month first phase of the project, which we raised just under $450,000 for. And actually earlier today, and it's great to have Naba with us this morning, we started talking about phase 2. And I think in a different world, we would have been looking at a phase two that is about recovery, but we're really still in an emergency phase of this situation, and therefore, in many ways, the work that we've been doing so far will continue in that regard. Basically, and I think you've touched on this already, we want to make sure that we're funding the diocese's work both in Gaza and in the West Bank. I think recognizing that there's a need in both places. So I can talk a little bit about our institutions and how that's working, and hopefully, Naba, you can come in and speak, I think, more from the PWRDF perspective of how you're supporting it. So the Anglican Church in Gaza, as I mentioned, has the Al-Ahli Hospital, sometimes known as the Baptist Hospital, because for about 20 years the Baptists ran it. It was founded originally by Anglicans back in the 19th century, and it's operated continuously since then. And that's based in Gaza City itself. It's remained open through most of the conflict. It was struck by a rocket on the 17th of October. It's still not entirely clear where that rocket came from. I think know the bottom of it, but fundamentally what happened was many people were killed because a lot of about over 500 people were sheltering in the courtyard of the hospital, and that's where the rocket hit. Many were killed in that. Since then, there's also been a temporary closure where many of the hospital staff were arrested. Almost all of the hospital staff were arrested and brought back ultimately and eventually, but many of them to the southern Gaza Strip rather than to Gaza City itself. But even through that, the hospital remained open with a very small amount of staff. And today, there's about 250 to 300 outpatients every day and about 120 to 150 inpatients, between 25 and 30 operations happening in the hospital every day. So I think it's a real testament to presence and continued help, support for those in real need, and without the funds fundamentally to pay for the operations, really very necessary at the moment. The hospital has been very fortunate that it has a water source of its own well underneath the hospital, and also photovoltaic solar panels on the roof. So it's always been able to generate an amount of electricity. Unfortunately, in one of the aid drops that you may have seen, one of them actually did land on our roof and damage some of the photovoltaic panels. But it is continuing to receive fuel, continuing to receive medication, and the World Food Programme and the WHO have both been UN agencies that have been able to reach and provide those resources there. And money still being able to be transferred to the hospital, and there's still a cash economy that is working there, which I think is remarkable. As I mentioned, there's this outreach now that's based in Khan Yunis, a very small clinic that's reaching around 120 people a day, approximately, in this sort of territory. More of a clinic. It's got pharmaceutical supplies, basic medical care that otherwise is difficult to access. And recently, the Princess Basma Center, which is based in Jerusalem, works mostly with children with developmental and physical difficulties, has employed 3 people in Gaza to work across the north and the south to support children, particularly in need, and that's linked to Al-Ahli's work. And then in the West Bank, similarly, a lot of our institutional work is through medical care. We have St. Luke's Hospital in Nablus and the Penman Clinic in Zababde, which are providing more basic medical care, but medical care that's needed, including operations. And the money from this appeal is going directly to support individual operations for people in need there. One of the challenges we've seen is both access to hospitals is quite limited, and people are very concerned about their ability to afford medical care. There's no free medical care in the West Bank, but I think we've done a relatively good job of ensuring that St. Luke's can provide discounted or free medical care, and when people know that, they're more willing to make the efforts to travel in very difficult circumstances. There are checkpoints that are emerging every morning in new places, and sometimes ones set up by settlers rather than by the army itself. So I think that's been an amazing ministry. And then finally, I think just thinking economically, there is so much economic stress that people are not able to continue paying school fees. And I think one of the amazing things that the appeal has allowed us to do is keep schools open, keep the teachers employed, and ensure that people who otherwise were going to have to take their children out of education in education because we've been able to subsidize the fees for their costs. So that's kind of a short portrait of the medical and educational support that this field has provided so far.
Right. Now, but from PWRDF, how have we been responding, both participating in the Anglican Alliance initiative and in the relationship with the Diocese of Jerusalem?
Yes, Suzanne. So as Joel said, before Anglican Alliance convened this 8 partner from 5 countries coming together, working and supporting alongside with the Diocese of Jerusalem. And then when this October 7, 2023 crisis began, even before the fundraising started here from the annual budget, PWRDF sent 30,000 in support of the hospital again. At that time, we didn't know the extent of displacement and damage, but fundraising began. And so when Anglican Alliance, being a part of the Anglican Alliance, throughout the world, we have been in touch with the Alliance, with Joel and Rachel, and so we joined this joint initiative. So this project, as Joel said, has raised around 450,000 US dollar from the partners, and our contribution there is 175,000 Canadian, which is around 125,000 plus US, for the 6 month first phase of 6 months, which is coming to end soon. So as Joel mentioned, we've been meeting frequently to review the progress, to listen and to pray with the partners together. And then soon the diocese will come with a plan, concept note for the second phase, and we'll be again with Joel and Rachel from the Anglican Alliance, bringing us together, and also with the Diocese of Jerusalem. We'll review the plan, depending on the resources. Each one of us will make some commitments and work together again. So we hope to work for the next phase as well.
I'd like to end this conversation with asking each of you if you have a story of hope, of a person or a situation in the midst of this terrible crisis that is a sign of hope in the midst of it all. And maybe I'll start with you, Joel.
Thank you. I'll try and keep short, but there's 3 people I'd like to highlight. The first is Suzanne, who is the Programs Development Officer for the Diocese of Jerusalem. She is living the experience of a world transformed since the 7th of October as a Palestinian woman. Her niece, Layan Nasser, who has been in the press recently, is from our Anglican parish in Berzait. And she was administratively detained by the Israeli military in the springtime and is being held without charge. And we don't know when she's going to be released. So that's her daily reality. And, I think that's a very hard reality to live in. And yet she turns up every single day and works tirelessly and hopefully and optimistically. And I think, it's such a blessing to work alongside her in all that she's doing to make this possible. She's always so thankful for the Anglican Alliance and PWRDF and the other partners, very vocal in that. But she's also very vocal in her frustration, in her sadness. But I think she remains optimistic about the work that is being done. She sees the goodness of what it is and what it represents. And I think to keep carrying on despite the personal challenges she's facing, coming to and from work on a daily basis, I think is really a remarkable good. And then within the diocese, our Anglican Archbishop, Sam Naum, is, I think, a figurehead of hope, because he sees this. He's been interviewed recently in many places, and says this has been an absolute tragedy as a moment in time, and he very openly mourns all of the loss of life that's happened, the continuing loss of life in Gaza for Palestinians, but also those lives lost in Israel, and yet sees that there is a moment of opportunity in this for a lasting solution with peace and justice. And he keeps talking about this. And I think the ability to do that, despite what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, he was at Al Ahli just days before the 7th of October, opening new facilities. And I think to still see hope despite all of the damage and destruction that's happened is a remarkable thing. And I think that shepherding pastoral quality is something you absolutely need in a bishop at this time. He's really providing that. And then his good friend and our partner in the Latin church, the Cardinal Pierbattista Pizzaballa, I think is also just a true example of Christian witness. After hostages were taken, Israeli hostages were taken after the 7th of October, he immediately said, look, I'm willing to exchange my place for them. And I don't think anyone really took it seriously at the time. I think people thought, it's a nice thing to say, but it's not helpful or whatever. But we had an amazing sight last week when I was checking my social media, and suddenly it was images of him in Gaza. He'd gone in to visit the Holy Family Church, the Catholic parish church there in Gaza City, and stayed for 4 nights with them. And I think that sense of presence and being present with the Palestinian Christians there was an amazing thing to do. So I think in him and in Archbishop Hossam, we have the example of leaders who are, in a very non-anxious way, being shepherds of their flocks. And I think we have to be inspired by that. And I think my kind of call to you listening today is try and be that hope where you are. I think it's calling for a lasting ceasefire, not one that's just about the end of current hostilities, but that really looks to the future of a peace with justice that can be present. And we know that this time has been one where Islamophobia and anti-Semitism around the world has increased dramatically, and it's terrible to see on both sides. So where you exist in communities where you can, as Christians, bring people together rather than divide them, and offer love and Christian care in that space, I would just really encourage you to do that where you are, because I think we have some amazing examples of it in the Middle East, despite the difficulty of remaining in that position of saying, look, we believe in peace, we believe in hope, we believe in a future that is a shared vision for all the peoples that live in the land of the Holy One. And I think for me that it helps me to keep going with the work I'm doing, because it's inspiring to be around.
Thanks so much, Joel. And Naba, who or what has inspired you, given you some hope in addressing this situation?
Yes, Suzanne, as Joel mentioned, Suzanne has been my contact person at the diocese for many years now. And just a couple of weeks ago, through Joel, she shared an interim report for this current phase, and in there, I found this paragraph, which I'll read out to you. Reaching out to people in need, regardless of their religious, social, and racial state, isn't only one of the noblest deeds, but also has the slight yet amazing power of taking a person's despair and swept it gently into a gesture of hope. This effective glimpse of hope took over some tough situations. Your generous donations to hundreds of needy families didn't cover their entire needs, nor change their entire lives, but it helped them tremendously during some of the most difficult times that they were going through. So the project so far reached out to more than 1,500, I think, the families, and she's summarized this well in terms of the impact and hope. And along with the report, she shared some photos and 2 videos as well. And in that video, I saw children of the kindergarten doing painting, playing together, and that was remarkable. And then the St. George School, which is another institution being supported under this project, has this adolescents students, and they in the video they have seen them playing a little bit of volleyball and they call football there. And I remember myself, I love these 2 sports so much, and I played to being in the hostel while being in pre-university. So it was remarkable work that they have done there. So yeah, it's amazing work and the true testimony of resilience in Ahli Arab Hospital there by the staff. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you both so much.